When it comes to home studio recording, I honestly believe we all have the same goal. No matter what type of music you're interested in recording in your home studio space, we want it to sound as polished, professional, and radio ready as we can possibly get it with what we're able to afford and the space limitations that we have in our home studios. I want to show you guys, after years and years and years of experimenting with different pieces of equipment, different setups, different ways of miking and doing things, what has become my method here for my home studio that got me that sound I have been chasing for years and years, the pieces of gear that I depend on and I think are reliable and I've fallen in love with, and maybe that can inspire some of you guys out there looking to either put together your first home studio or to maybe add a piece of gear here or there, but give you some inspiration with your own setups and maybe allow you to turn corners with your setup like I did years ago when I incorporated a few different pieces and I was like, that's it. That's the sound I've been chasing. Let me show you what I have going on here in my home studio. I've been in many large professional recording studios to photograph bands and to photograph studios as a photographer. And the biggest thing I noticed between a home studio setup like mine and a professional studio is obviously a lot of them are much larger. The rooms, usually, especially the live room, sounds amazing. A lot of times they have a fantastic console. I've seen vintage Neve consoles. A friend of mine literally has an SSL 9000 board. And the musicians that are recording there are generally a hell of a lot better than I am. You put that combination together and it sounds pretty awesome. But what you're doing in your home studio, I've noticed a lot of times the process is pretty similar to what they're doing on a larger budget, higher end studio scale. I mean, I have a Royer 121 here in my house in front of, say, a Marshall cabinet, just like I saw in a pro studio. So maybe theirs is going into an SSL channel, and that recording chain through the, the different compressors and the EQs and the way everything is getting summed out of the console is where you're hearing the biggest sonic differences. But nowadays, home studios, especially with where interfaces have gone and the quality you get for the money, you can make a pretty polished, professional sounding mix right in your home studio because how good equipment has gotten over the years. So I've noticed that I don't really chase gear as much as I used to because what I'm using now sounds amazing and I don't need it to be any better than it is here. I could take any track I'm doing here in my home studio, maybe have it mastered, or maybe even nowadays master it myself and throw it on YouTube and it sounds pretty damn good. So let me show you some of the key components to how I'm getting the sound that I've come to love out of my home studio here and what pieces I think were essential and kind of made me say, that's it. That's the sound I've been looking for, and that piece of gear made a difference. A lot of times you'll spend time in online forums. I remember Gear Sluts was a huge one for me, and I would just ask people or follow conversations where people would say, do you think this mic is that much better than this mic, or is this compressor that much better than this one? And a lot of times it was because you wanted to, you had your eye on a piece of equipment and you wanted to get an opinion from other people as to whether or not you thought that would help you get a little bit better of a sound. We all do it. I still do it at times when I'm researching something, but the pieces of equipment I'm gonna go over right now, I can guarantee you they will make your stuff sound great. At least you're gonna get a lot out of these pieces of equipment. So let's start with the computer I'm using. There are so many different computers that are good for recording music. I'm not gonna get into which one is better, for this or this or that. I'm just gonna tell you what I use and what I've been using for years. I love the Apple iMac for music production. Now, some of you might hate the iMac, but this is my personal preference. Remember also, I do not have people in here as clients to record. This is a hobby I do just for myself, but I like everything to sound great. The iMac has been my choice for many years. I love the 27-inch iMac. I just bought a new one about 2 years ago. It is more than fast enough. It's only getting used for my music. And I love the large screen because I can see it from my drum kit. I can see it from over here where my amp wall is or my bass rig. And I don't use a laptop here in my home studio. If I need a remote control to anything, I can use the Studio One. I'm using Studio One Pro as a DAW, by the way. It's my absolute favorite. I switched over from Pro Tools many years ago and never looked back. I just like Studio One. Now, remember too, I don't hand off files to other mix engineers, so I know Pro Tools is kind of the standard, but Studio One has always been a great DAW. I use that. I've used Harrison Mix Bus every now and then, which is just kind of fun to play with, but I'm not 100% committed to it. I still think it has some bugs in it that need to be worked out, but that's a whole other video. So 27-inch iMac, I'm running Studio One Pro, the latest version. Let's get into the monitors. Monitors, again, there are so many pairs out there to choose from. You can spend from a few $100 up to probably $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on ridiculous studio monitors with subwoofers, center field, near field, midfield. I mean, everything you can think of. I don't need all that in my home studio. The set of monitors that I have come to love the most are the Yamaha HS6s. Hands down, these have been my favorite for many, many years. I've had the 8s. I had a set of Adams. I had a set of Genelecs back in the day. I ended up selling them because I thought the Yamaha sounded great. The mixes have been translating fantastic to my car when I'm listening to it in my car. And but there was one of those corner turning kind of sonic moments where I went, wow, that really works. And that's when I incorporated the SonarWorks reference plugin, okay? Now also remember too, I don't get paid by any of these people to mention their names. I'm telling you the things that I have sampled and tried that work for me and things that I really love. The SonarWorks reference plugin was a game changer for me. Not only did I hear a difference, but it fixed my overly bassy problem I was having. I was pushing way too much low end into my mixes. When I would get in my car, the bass was just tubby and it was big and way too assertive. When I started using the SonarWorks plugin, it was a real game changer in helping me kind of fix my room issues. Now, I do have a treated tracking area and a small amount of treatment around where my computer and monitor sit, but still, this is not a professional room with $50,000 worth of, treatment going on in it, but some things that I did here in my home studio that really helped. I added ceiling diffusion that kept the cymbals from being so splashy off the ceiling because I don't have overly high ceilings. It also helped get rid of some of that nasally mid-range that I was getting in my tracks, and the bass absorption that I have on the walls near where my monitors are was essential to helping me clean up that problem. That, along with the SonarWorks plugin, was a game changer in helping my mixes translate better to just about anywhere I was playing them. So I highly recommend that plugin if you're interested in a little bit more calibration for your monitors and your setup as a whole. It would be amazing to have a big console in my home studio, but like many of you, I'm not dropping 60 grand on a console. It's not necessary. I'm getting the sound that I love. Interfaces are hotter than ever nowadays, and I have tried a bunch of them. I have had Apogees, RMEs. I've had UA Apollos. As a matter of fact, I had rack mount Apollos. I had the Apollo Twin, the first and the Mark II, just because I wanted to upgrade and see if this one sounded better, and is the conversion in this one better than this one. I had an Apogee Ensemble at one point, so I've had some really nice setups. The funny thing is, although seemingly I've had better interfaces, the interface that I have fallen in love with, that I've kept the longest, and I still use it every single day to this day, is the Audient ID44. This interface, again, was one of those corner turning moments. I matched this up side by side to an Apollo Twin. I tracked through both of them because at the time I was using the Twin mainly. And when I tried the Audient, I bought one just to try it out. I was going to send it back if I didn't like it to Sweetwater. And when I matched the tracks up side by side, to me, the Audient sounded a little bit cleaner and a little more detailed. And I just liked the conversions sound a little bit better. I mean, that's personal opinion. I have friends that would tell me I'm crazy to think that Audient's better than UA. It's not better. It's different, and it's something that I personally like the sound of. Now, I really wish Audient would get on board and making maybe an 8 or a 16 channel analog in, but it's working out just fine because it has 2 ADAT inputs. I'll get into how I'm making the fullest use of this interface, but the Audient ID44 sounds amazing. The conversion quality is fantastic. It has 4 built-in analog microphone inputs. Now, I don't really use those that much. However, I have used those, and the Audient built-in preamps are way, way underrated. Now, a lot of you already know about this interface, or you've seen it, you've researched it, you've seen a YouTube video about it, and you've heard probably how great it is. I can do nothing but rave about it. I've used those 4 analog inputs. Audient preamps sound great to me. I could track a whole record with just those preamps. It's a different sound. It's clean, but it's not sterile. The high end sounds really has a good sheen to it, but it's not brittle. I could throw 1,000 cliche audio terms at you. It's all there. They sound fantastic. It is a underpriced interface. $699 when I bought it. I even think the Mark II version that just came out, which I'm not sure if I'll upgrade to because I think this one sounds great. I think it's worth maybe 2.5 times that. I highly recommend this if you need a tank-built interface. It's 20 in if you use the ADAT and the 4 analog inputs. It's got a nice big control knob, and it just has a little bit of that console feel to it. The built-in software where you control all your inputs on your computer screen is fun to use, it's easy to use, and I just love this interface. So that was a game-changing piece of equipment for me. $700 for that, and I've never looked back. I've been using it now, I think, for 4 years exclusively. I have no desire to upgrade. Let's move over to the brain of my home studio here and where everything comes together. What pieces of gear in this rack I think are essential and how I'm using it. Quite a long time ago when I just started with some simple external preamps, I think I had maybe 1 little patch bay. I had a much smaller metal rack, but as my outboard gear collection grew a bit and I needed a little bit more routing and things like that, I started looking at a larger rack unit that was going to be the hub of my studio, and I also wanted one that was made out of wood, and it kind of matched the core of what I have going on in my home studio, which is this nice kind of walnut color. But they are obnoxiously expensive. They were like between $400 and $700 a piece for a really well-built, real wood one, not a pressboard kind of thing, So I thought I'd build my own, and it turned out just gorgeous. It took me about 3-4 nights. I love woodworking also as kind of like a hobby. And I am a highly motivated individual. If you are as motivated as I am, I highly recommend giving this project a shot. You can find out some measurements and details online, but it was super easy. I actually laid it out myself measurement-wise. The biggest thing you have to be careful of is making sure your interior, wall-to-wall, inside measurements are dead nuts on, or obviously the gear won't fit right. You also want to make sure that you put the racks in perfectly level, which is not hard if you use a friggin' level. Because you don't want your gear sitting all wonky. I bought the inner rack rails from Amazon, the hairpin legs from Amazon, and it turned out just gorgeous, and it matches everything in my home studio. I built it out of Baltic birch, and this was before the huge recent jump in wood prices, of course, but my final cost was about $105 versus about $500, and in my opinion, this looks as good as anything I could have purchased, at least that I would have been happy with. So that's a custom-made rack. Let's get into what's inside. Okay, so at the top here, you're gonna notice my 2 patch bays. Now, I already, a long time ago, I had a bunch of 1/4-inch Megami patch cables made, so the 1/4-inch platform when it comes to patch bays made a lot of sense for me because I already had very nice patch cables. I also don't need a $1,500 Switchcraft or whatever the hell it's called, patch bay in my studio because again, this is not a pro studio, but I also don't want garbage. Now, one thing I will warn you about when it comes to the cheaper patch bays, some of them, to change the routing, whether it be normaled or half normaled or through, you have to physically get behind the unit, pull the little gizmo out, rotate it, and stick it back in. If I'm gonna do all that, I might as well ditch the patch bay and hand run wires, which is the whole point of having a patch bay. Watch that you do. I do not recommend buying one of those. I had one of those and that thing sucked. I'm a big fan of the Samson S-Patch patch bays. If you're looking for something that is more than affordable, they're around $100 a piece. You could probably even get them on eBay for 60 or 70 bucks a piece. I've never heard any hiss, noise issues, cracking, popping, and I did a side-by-side compare running straight into my interface and then running through the patch bays with a little and a lot of equipment hooked to it, and I could not hear a difference in the tracks. I brought them all up in my analyzer. I didn't see any distortion. I'm nerdy like that where I look at stuff like that, and I was expecting for $100 that if it had a little bit of noise, so be it. No noise. I highly recommend the Samson S-Patch patch bays. And by the way, a lot of you might think, I don't need a patch bay, I don't have a lot of gear. I thought the same thing too, and for many years I didn't use a patch bay. Then I bought one, hooked it up, used it for a few months, and then I was like, I don't really use it that much, so I took it back out, put it on the shelf, ran a few mic lines direct, didn't use it for a long time. As I started to acquire more preamps, I was like, this is ridiculous, running these wires to the back of all these different mic things when I want to change stuff around. It's silly. Use a patch bay. They are the greatest thing ever. You will never walk into a high-end studio and not see a very large patch bay, or at least large use of a patch bay of some sort, because there's no way they're gonna run around and switch all these lines to all these different pieces of equipment when they want to try a new compressor or they want to throw this line through this piece of equipment. Patch bays are built to make your life easy, and don't let them confuse you. They're super easy to use. Patch bays are simple. The top row is all of your equipment's outs run to the top row. So every mic preamp, every compressor, every character piece you have in your outboard gear, the outputs run to the top, the inputs run to the bottom. Patch bays usually come 3 different ways, or you can switch them 3 different ways: normaled, half normaled, and through. It is not complicated, it is not rocket science. Normaled means that whatever you have plugged into the back of the top and whatever you have plugged into the back of the bottom of the same channel, the top automatically feeds the bottom, and you don't have to use a patch cable to make that connection. So in the case here, if you look at my channel 1 on the top patch bay, I have a classic audio product of Illinois, VP312, feeding directly into my ADAT1, which is being sent digitally to the interface. I do not have to use a patch cable to make that connection. Now, if I stick a patch cable into the VP312 output here, it immediately breaks that connection, and it's going to send it wherever the patch cable then goes, canceling it going to the ADAT1 underneath of it, unless I remake that connection later. Half normaled is another way that you can route, make your patch bay operate for each channel. Half normal basically means that that top is going to directly feed to the one below it, and if I put a patch cable, say, in the output of the top, and I route that patch cable somewhere else, it's going to go where the patch cable is routed to, but it's going to continue to feed the bottom also. The last method is called through. The last way you can switch is called through. That basically means that whatever you have plugged into the top of that channel and the bottom of that channel remain absolutely independent of one another. They do not feed, and you have to physically make every connection you want to make for those channels. I use them in different ways. The best part about the Samson S patch bays are that the switch for how you want that channel half normaled, normaled, or through is right there in front, easily accessible on every single channel. That is another big reason I love the Samson S patch bays. Now you'll also notice the Samson S patch bays come with a blue face to them, and mine are all white. Well, these are decals basically that I had cut from a company called Trace Audio. They make these really, really precisely pre-cut labels for any interface you could possibly think of. They're about I think I paid $6 or $7 a piece for them maybe, or maybe even for $2, I can't remember, but I'll put the link in the description, and it allows you to use a fine point Sharpie to write, what's what on every channel. If you want to change something, you use a little bit of alcohol, wipe it off, and I really like these labels. And I used to print out little labels for everything, but man, that was tedious, cutting them real small and sticking them on there. So I really like these Trace Audio labels. I highly recommend them. And again, you don't have to have a Samson S patch bay. You can have whatever patch bay you want. They list hundreds that they have labels pre-cut for. So highly recommend it. And I highly recommend using a patch bay. You can see all my gear. Everything in my studio is routed right to these 2 patch bays. I'm using 2 of them also so that I have some room to expand if I change things up or add any additional outboard gear. Now, let's move to the fun stuff. Preamps, and more preamps. I love preamps. And not only do I love preamps, I love that API vibe. It has always been my favorite. I've tried Neve preamps. And don't get me wrong, everything I'm describing here sounds amazing. It has a sound of its own, but we all have our personal preferences. I've always been a big fan of the API vibe, and not just the API vibe. When I very first tried the Classic Audio Products of Illinois preamps, the kind that you build yourself, I fell in love with them. The VP312 is the first one I ever bought. It was one of those, again, one of those sonic turning corner things where I've never looked back and I said, that's it, that's the sound I'm looking for. So a lot of people, though, they're afraid to buy these preamps because you have to build them yourself unless you pay to have them built, or you buy a pre-built one. Therefore, the cost is going to be about double in most cases. You can get a VP312, if I'm not mistaken, for less than around $350. Now you do have to add an op amp to it, which raises the cost by about 50 or 60 bucks. I am running red dot op amps in every single one of my preamps that are from CAPI, which is what people call the Classic Audio Products of Illinois. That red dot has become the sound I was looking for. I tried the Guard 2520s, I tried the 1731s, and I do like the sound of those, but not as much in the preamps. I like them in the compressor and EQs better. Red dot op amps and CAPI preamps are the basis for my home studio sound. It was the sound I've been looking for. And I bet you I had 30 or 40 different preamps over the years that I've purchased, I've sold. I've had Chandler, I've had, Crane Song. I've had everything you can think of. And there's some amazing ones out there. But when I hit the CAPI preamps, it just made sense to me. I loved it, and my drums have never sounded better. They are so killer on drums and just about everything else. If you cannot make a record with the CAPI preamps, it is not the preamp. They're clean, they have a lot of character to them, and let's move from left to right and show you which ones I chose and how I'm using them. When I very first built the VP312, I loved it so much, I wanted to use it for my drum overheads. So I purchased the second one, built it. And by the way, if you're on the fence about buying these because it's a kit and you need to build it, I promise you can build these. If you are detailed and you're patient, you follow the instruction. And by the way, right here on my channel, I have a very detailed video of how to build the VP312 that I made for the owner of CAPI that he could refer people to help them build their first VP312. I can turn out one of these in about an hour now. They're very easy to build, and they're a lot of fun. And again, they should cost 3 times what they do. I love the VP312s for my drum overheads. I got my other 2 that I bought, I use on my room mics. They are my favorite for room mics. Now, don't get me wrong, you could track an entire record with just the 312s, but for me, the 312s for overheads and room mics are my favorite. Next, the VP26s. And by the way, the VP312s, they have a nice airy high end, they have a nice full low end, they have a very controlled mid-range. They're not mid-range forward preamps. The VP26s, they are my favorite for snare top, snare bottom, a lot of my guitar work. They have a little bit more of a mid-range presence, a very controlled low end, but very balanced from, I would say, from low to high. Nothing really pokes out. except a little bit of mid-range. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, the VP312 sound the most like classic API, as far as that 70s kind of Huntington API, and the VP26s to me sound the closest to modern API. Now, this is all my personal opinion, and it will start a firestorm, I'm sure, but that's my opinion. Next, the VP25s. Now, these are my favorite for a little bit fuller low end. I love these on my kick in. I love these on my kick out for my bass amp when I record my Ampeg amps. The VP25 has the fullest low end and a controlled high end, in my opinion. Next, maybe one of the finest 500 series preamps ever built, and again, personal opinion, the VP28. This is a two-stage preamp where you can drive the in, pull the output down, get a little bit more of that good transformer saturation, push that op amp, and the VP28 is just, it is a straight up beast. It's a giant. It's unbelievably beautiful sounding. I love it on vocals. I love it on guitars. I love it on acoustic guitar. It's just a lot of fun to use, and you could use it again on just about anything. Now, these are, you know, tiny sonic differences I'm describing, but there are differences. And then the last preamp you're going to see in this API 10 slot lunchbox is an actual API 512C, because why not have a real API? Even though I like the CAPI better than real API, especially modern API. There's something about modern API that doesn't sound as good as vintage. Don't kill me for saying that. I'm not being a snob. I swear I hear a difference. But anyway, I have a 512C. C is the 500 series that does not have the polarity switch. There are some sonic differences I've noticed between the B and the C. However, the biggest difference to me, it doesn't have a polarity switch, which does not matter to me. Now this, it's classic, you know, it's got a modern API sound to it. I love it on my snare drum. I love it on guitars, just about anything. It's a great all-around classy preamp. That's kind of how I describe it. It's just a good high-end classy preamp that you could use across the board. Moving down to the next unit, this is an Audient ASP880. Now, again, going back to the Audient ID44 interface that I love and I've been using for ages, it only has 4 analog inputs, but it does have 2 ADAT inputs. So I wanted additional preamps that I could use if I needed even more mic setup, or if I was recording friends in here and I wanted just a whole bunch of optional mic setup. I wanted 8 more channels, but I wanted them to be able to optically go into the ADAT of the Audient interface. The Audient ASP880 marries beautifully with the interface. And by the way, I was shocked at how good the preamps sound in this. They are just stellar. In some cases, I am liking the room mics through the ASP880 and my overheads as much as the CAPI preamps. It's different. It's a different sound. The CAPI preamps have a little more character to them, whereas the Audient preamps in the ASP880, now they're supposed to be the exact same preamps that's in the ID44, but to me, I think I hear some differences. I think the ASP880 sounds better to me, but it could be some psychology, I don't know. But they sound fantastic. They are warm, but not too warm. It's not like a Neve thing. They're really smooth and just clean. And again, you could track an entire drum kit, guitars, record your entire album through this piece, and it marries beautifully. All 8 of these preamps are going out to, optically out to my Audient interface. And right then and there, boom, it marries well. They come up on the screen. It's just a beautiful thing to have. I highly recommend this if you're looking for an 8-channel rack mount preamp that can ADAT. So that is the biggest thing for me. Let's move down to my next preamps. Now, as much as I love the API sound and I love the Audient preamps, every now and then I want a little bit of a different flavor. I want that Neve-ish kind of vibe. So a long time ago, I tried some of the warm audio stuff, and I really, really dug the WA73s. A lot of people kind of hate on these, but a lot of people seem to love these. It's all personal opinion. I can do nothing but rave about them. I liked it so much that I went from the 73 and I went and bought a 73 EQ. I love it on snare top. I really love it on big pillowy kick drums with a lot of room to them. It just has that Neve kind of vibe to them, that 1073 vibe. And does it sound like a 1073? I couldn't care less. I've never owned a 1073 and I'm never gonna buy a 1073, but they sound killer to me. They're nice and warm. There's a tone control button on them that allows you to change the impedance, which actually has a huge effect on the sound, believe it or not. The ASP880, you can actually change the impedance in 3 different ways on every single channel. And again, that makes a difference in the clarity and warmth. So any mics that you're using with the warm or the Audient ASP880, you can really experiment with those impedance buttons to get a little, change in tone. But the WA73s, I use those every now and then when I just want a different vibe. The last preamp I'm going to show you is if I'm looking for a little tube vibe. So when I was looking at preamps a long time ago, I wanted to incorporate at least one nice tube preamp. I don't think you can do better than the Universal Audio LA610, the Mark II, the MK2, I say Mark II, whatever. This is just a classy piece of kit. I mean, this thing sounds killer. It has an LA2A style compressor in it. It has EQ in it, and it just sounds phenomenal. It's one of those buy, keep, don't ever sell kind of units. I got mine for like 900 bucks used, and I mean, the price of those has gone up over the years. I think new now, I've seen them for like, what are they, like $1,800 or $1,900? But no, it was a demo at Guitar Center years and years and years ago, like 7 years ago. And it was $8.99, and the guy used it and brought it back, and for some reason, Guitar Center didn't mark it up a fortune like they usually do. But it sounds amazing. I love it on bass. I use it a lot on bass, and it sounds great on vocals. You need a tube vibe, that's your preamp in my opinion. There's a lot out there to choose from, but once I picked that one, I kind of stuck with it. I've always been a bit of a UA fanboy. I really love their products. I think it's a whole classy operation. So I highly recommend the LA610 MK2. If you got an extra 1,500 bucks laying around and you want something so much fun to play with, plus it just looks so sick. It just looks like good outboard gear, and we all love that. So, okay, now let's figure out how to get all this, the rest of my preamps into that other ADAT slot on the Audient ID44. I'll show you what I'm using to do that. When I made the decision to go with the Audient ID44, one thing I was a little concerned about, I got it from Sweetwater, I think, was how do I get all of my CAPI preamps into it? How do I get it to record all my external preamps? And I want those preamps to sound like they do. I don't want to have anything influence their sound. So basically what the guy told me I was looking for is a 8-channel converter. I only want it like 8 at a time. So I was looking around, and man, they are so friggin' expensive. There was one from, I think, Lynx that was like $4,200, one from Dangerous. I didn't want to spend that kind of money. So he said, how about trying this PreSonus DP88? It was around 700 bucks, and basically what it allows you to do is it's an 8-channel rack mount preamp, but it allows you to go into each channel and push a button called direct, and allows you to hit the converter directly, bypassing the internal preamps, so that you can use an outboard, another preamp, and just have it convert the signal to ADAT, come out the back of it ADAT into my second and last ADAT input on the Audient interface. That is running to the Audient, the ASP takes up the other ADAT input, and now I am banging out 20 channels. So it worked beautifully. I bought the PreSonus DP88, and honestly, because it was less than $1,000, I was like, I wonder how good it could possibly sound. Now, I do track everything here in my home studio at 48 instead of 44, and I don't have a need to go above 48. I really don't think in a home studio setup you really need to. I don't have any need to record at 96 or 88, whatever it is. But if you're doing 48, you can do 8 channels of ADAT. If you go to above that, you can only do 4 at a time. It works beautifully, absolutely beautifully. So I have all 8 channels as direct, and then basically if you go back and look at my patch bay, I have all of my CAPI preamps. I have them normaled to ADAT 1 through 8 of the DP88, to where I really don't even have to put a patch cable. It automatically routes it to the ADAT inputs straight into my DAW. If I want to use a different preamp, I just make the connection in my patch bay and send it into the ADAT channel instead. This is one of those pieces of gear that was a game changer for me. It sounds so beautiful, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a great converter that does not cost one of your appendages. The DP88 is a fantastic choice. Let's get to the very last piece of gear that I have here. Because I really had a lot of fun building my preamps, I came across a thing called DIYRE color palette. And a lot of you might already be familiar with this, but basically they're little 500 series units that you can plug these color cards into, which are like flavors. It's like salt and pepper and spices. Each card can be a different flavor, and each of the 500 series color palette units, the actual 500 series unit, can hold 3 cards. And then you can mix the cards, meaning you could use 1 flavor, 2 flavors, all 3, and control how much of each one you want to use. These things are so much friggin' fun to play with. They sound really cool. I love the 15 IPS tape simulation one. I love the one that sounds like British console. I love the one that sounds like I think it's a API console. The Pentode Vibe one is really great for adding good saturation. They're just a blast to play with. I actually they sell this 2-slot 500 series rack unit as a kit that you can build. So I figured that would be fun to do, and I needed a place to put those anyway because the rest of my lunch boxes are full, and they're just great to have. I love running my snare drum through the 15 IPS. They're basically like hardware plugins, if that makes any sense. You can line out from your interface into one of these, add a little bit of flavor. You got some knobs to turn, which is always fun. And they're just cool. And they're not overly expensive. People are dropping them on eBay all the time because they decide, I don't hear enough of a difference, or it's not what I thought it was. So a lot of times I'll grab them when people are dropping different little palette cards, the little color cards, and I'll get them for like 20, 30 bucks sometimes. So if you're looking for an extra little thing to play with, I highly recommend these. They're a lot of fun. Now, let's move from this rack up to the top, and let's see what I have in my Lindell lunchbox. So on top of my rack here, you'll notice I have a Lindell lunchbox. I really like the 6-slot lunchbox from Lindell. It sounds great. I never had any issues with it. And it's just a good, clean unit. Now, I did upgrade to the second version of this lunchbox where it had the external power supply because I was getting noise from the original version where the power supply was built into the lunchbox. I did hear noise on channel 1, so I ended up selling that. I got the second version where it had the external one. So I highly recommend, if you're looking at the Lindell lunchbox, the 6-channel one, make sure you get the second version that has the power supply outside of the unit. It made a huge difference in the clarity of channel 1 and 2 at times. I would hear a little bit of hiss actually from the power supply. Okay, this is where I have my EQs, my compressor, and one of my all-time favorite 500 series toys, the Radial EXTC. That is the unit where you can mix through guitar stomp boxes, which is so friggin' addicting. It's so much fun to do. Especially, I love flange, like old school, like sort of 0 through flanging, but I don't like to track it all the time. I like to route out from my mix and hand control my guitar track to exactly where I want the flange to happen. The Radial EXTC it's cheap. I think it's like $329. You can hook any stomp box to it, control how much level's going in and out of it and how much mix you want, and use all your stomp boxes, and it opens up an entire other world of sonic possibilities when you're mixing, so a lot of fun. Over on the other side, you're going to notice a couple other EQs here. The first 2, again, from Classic Audio Products of Illinois. I'm a fanboy. I love the LC, the 20 or the 25, and the LC40. Both of these EQs sound absolutely beautiful and have become favorites of mine. Next is an API 560, which, surprise, surprise, is my favorite kick drum EQ of all time. I love this on kick in especially. I like it on kick out. And It's an API 560. It's a classic. It sounds great. Next, I have an API 527 compressor. Now, this is one of those compressors that a lot of people, they're not big fans of, and a lot of people don't really talk about it. If you Google the 527 compressor, you're not going to see 100 videos on it like you will an API 560 EQ, because it's not overly popular. I love the 527, and as a matter of fact, I owned a 525, which is probably the most aggressive character compressor I've ever used. It takes some patience in learning how to use it the right way, but I just didn't find enough uses for it for me for $1,200. So I sold it. I got a 527 and I love it. The 527 is not a character compressor. It's more of a utility technical compressor. You use it literally to tame levels, and I use it for tracking, especially vocals and acoustic guitar. It is my favorite acoustic guitar compressor of all time when it comes to a single channel compressor. It's just really clean. You don't hear a lot of the compression. It's just doing its job. Now, you can slam it pretty good, but there's better compressors for character in my opinion. But if you want a good tracking compressor that really keeps things under control, it's classy sounding, you can't go wrong with the 527. It's a great console style mono compressor. So I really like it. I think it's going to stay in my lunchbox here for a long time. That's going to wrap up my rack unit and the lunchbox that sits on top of my rack unit. This equipment has stayed here for ages. I have no need to swap anything out at this point, and it is my favorite outboard gear that I've used to get the sound I'm getting. Now here's the next thing. How do I get all my microphones, all the mics routed to my drums, my guitar amps? How do I get them into this rack unit? Let me show you what I'm using here on my studio floor. I prefer to use what they call stage boxes, where I have a 16 channel, and recently I just built an 8 channel. I love stage boxes because it keeps all my microphones going into the same exact area. I can put any mic that I have on my guitar amp or my drum kit or my bass amp into any preamp that you see over in the rack. I have one 16 channel box. Now, I bought this first box here from a guy on eBay who has a private little company making these, and they are about $400 or $500. Now, I got mine used, so I only paid, I think, $2 something for it. It's a 16 channel. It's all Megami wired with Nutric Gold connectors, so it's a really classy piece. It looks great. It's the same wood color as everything else in my studio, and I loved it, and I bought it. Flash forward many years, I buy the ASP880, and now I wanted a second stage box just for that unit, so I only needed 8 channels. I went back on eBay, looked up this guy, and he had one, and it was $460. So my first thought was, there's no way in hell I'm going to pay $460 for an 8-channel stage box. So I built it, and I didn't think I could build it at first, but it was easier than I thought. Again, it married my woodworking skills with my soldering and wiring skills. It was so much fun to build. Total cost, $127. Knockout. It looks great. Everything worked beautifully. There's no noise, and it's wired with the exact Megami wiring that the other box is done with. I used his as inspiration and made mine a little bit deeper, a different handle, and honestly, I like mine better. But regardless, it's one of those really fun things that you can build yourself. You can learn how to wire Snake, and you can buy all of your own wiring parts, the input jacks, all that stuff from Redco, R-E-D-C-O. I'll put the link in the description. I get all my stuff from them. I do not buy guitar cables, microphone cables, DB25 connectors. I wire all that stuff myself nowadays. Once you learn it, you would be amazed at how much money you spend on wires that you no longer have to spend. I can buy 100 foot of Megami 2534 cabling and make as many XLRs in whatever length I want that come out exactly as good at what you can buy in a store with the same exact parts for a 1/16 of the cost. I highly recommend learning how to do this. And if anybody has any questions about that stuff, let me know. I'm always here to help. So I use 2 stage boxes. One is for all the other preamps. The other one is for my ASP880 only. They sit very neatly here on the floor. I can route anything into it to go over to the rack, and it just looks good, and it's very easy to use, which is the point of my home studio for me. So that is the gear that I'm using to record everything here in my home studio. I absolutely love this setup. It's so much fun to use. I'm proud of the pieces that I've built. I love the pieces of gear that I've accumulated. I don't really feel a need anymore to chase gear like I used to. If anybody has any questions at all, you want to just throw your opinion in the comments, you want to talk shop, I love to nerd out about this stuff, please let me know what you guys think. What are your favorite pieces that made you say, that's it, that's good enough for me? I would love to know what you guys are using in your home studios, and I'm always here to help. I don't know a lot, but I'm always here to help. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Stay safe, be kind to one another, and have fun recording.